Live in the CNN newsroom, I'm Ana Cabrera in New York. Republicans, you have been warned. Criticize the president in any way, and he will come down on you. Senator Mitt Romney is learning that crucial lesson today. President Trump now calling for the senators' impeachment. Despite the fact that senators cannot be impeached, the president writes, I'm hearing that the great people of Utah are considering their vote for their pompous Senator Mitt Romney to be a big mistake. I agree. He is a fool who is playing right into the hands of the do-nothing Democrats. Hashtag impeach Mitt Romney. The president added an extra word after pompous in an earlier tweet. All of this because Mitt Romney called the president's public appeal for China and Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden, quote, wrong and appalling. As far as President Trump is concerned, his very public request specifically targeting the Democratic frontrunner is not about politics at all.
I don't care about Biden's campaign, but I do care about corruption. His campaign, that's up to him. Politics, that's up to them. I don't care about politics.
CNN White House reporter Jeremy Diamond is live outside the White House. Jeremy, this claim from the president that these requests to investigate Biden and his son Hunter are not about politics but corruption, does it hold water?
Well, you heard the president yesterday dozens of times saying this is about corruption, this is not about politics. But of course, when the president was pressed to give an example of another investigation into corruption that he's asked another country to carry out, he couldn't name one other than the one that he's calling for with regards to Joe Biden. And that is where we find the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, today backing up the president's claims that this was all about corruption and not politics.
I was on the phone call. I'm on almost every phone call with the president, with every world leader. The president has every right to have these set of conversations. I know precisely what the United States Department of State, indeed sitting in front of you, is the previous ambassador to Ukraine. Mm-hmm. We know exactly what we were doing there. We were trying to create a situation where it wouldn't be a corrupt government, right? We wanted to make sure that they didn't interfere in our election in 2016.
We have now seen, Anna, of course, in those text messages that it was very clear that U.S. officials were very narrowly focused on the issue of the company that Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, sat on the board of, and on this question about 2016 elections investigation. But, of course, all you have to do, really, to understand this is to look at the president's record. And the Washington Post this morning is reporting that in one of the president's first calls with Russian leader Vladimir Putin, the president was not only praising Putin as a great leader, but also apologizing for not having called him sooner. And this is really just part of the broad embrace that we've seen from this president of autocratic leaders around the world, countries with very corrupt records, such as Russia, such as Saudi Arabia, such as the Philippines. All of these leaders, the president has privately on the phone, but also publicly repeatedly embraced them. Anna?
All right, Jeremy Diamond at the White House. Thank you. Silence. That's what you heard from most congressional Republicans this week as the investigation into President Trump and the Ukraine controversy ramped up. But as Republicans try to put their best spin on the whistleblower report and the Ukrainian phone call transcript, they face one tough obstacle: facts. CNN chief political correspondent Dana Bash has more.
What you mostly hear from congressional Republicans on impeachment is the sound of silence. GOP sources tell CNN they have a good reason for that: fear. They have no idea what else House Democrats investigating will uncover.
Along with GOP fear, frustration with the president. Performances like Wednesday in the Oval Office.
The whistleblower was so dishonest.
And later in the East Room.
This is a fraudulent crime on the American people.
His rambling, shoot-from-the-hip comments, his stream-of-consciousness tweets, not exactly an anti-impeachment roadmap for his fellow Republicans. In fact, a source involved in Senate GOP discussions tells CNN he is taking it upon himself to tweet about every shiny object. That is not helpful right now. To be sure, lots of Trump GOP allies eagerly came out to defend the initial bombshell, the transcript summary of the president asking Ukraine's leader to do him a favor and investigate his political opponent, Joe Biden.
It was a nothing burger for me, the phone call with the president and the Ukrainian president.
But GOP spin on behalf of Trump is not aging well, especially confronted with facts about the call.
President Trump replies, I would like you to do us a favor, though.
Well, you just added another word.
No, It's
you said,
in
I'd
the
like you to
transcript.
do a favor, though?
Yes, it's in the White House transcript.
And about the whistleblower.
You had a bureaucrat who didn't like the president.
Wait. What are you talking about?
We know he didn't like the president.
No, we don't know that.
Baseless attacks like that on the whistleblower.
When you have a whistleblower that reports things that were incorrect.
Plus repeated brazen threats from the president did compel Iowa Republican Chuck Grassley, a longtime champion of whistleblowers, to release a statement warning no one should be making judgments or pronouncements without hearing from the whistleblower first and carefully following up on the facts. Also noteworthy, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who rarely grants interviews. This week, he did, declaring if the House impeaches the president, the Senate will have no choice but to start a trial.
Under the Senate rules, we're required to take it up if the House does go down that path, and we'll follow the Senate rules.
Senate GOP sources say they're bracing for more shoes to drop. A politically dicey waiting game for more than a handful of Senate Republicans on the ballot and potentially vulnerable in 2020. From Cory Gardner in Colorado to Martha McSally in Arizona to Joni Ernst in Iowa, Susan Collins in Maine to Tom Tillis in North Carolina. It's not just their own political future at stake, but control of the Senate, which Republicans could lose with 3 or 4 seats, something McConnell is well aware of.
What I want to do is spend our time accomplishing things for the American people.
Several congressional Republicans we talked to complained that they're getting very little guidance from the White House. They decided at the White House not to set up a war room, despite an initial flirtation with that. Instead, the emails and tweets and ads are coming out of the campaign, but people on the Hill we talked to say that that's all well and good, but with something this dire, it needs to come from the White House. Dana Bash, CNN, Washington.
Okay, let's bring in CNN's chief media correspondent and anchor of reliable sources here on CNN, Brian Stelter, and CNN political analyst Sarah Isgur. And Sarah, CNN reached out to 85 Republican lawmakers in the House and the Senate to see if they had concerns, not only with Ukraine, but also with China and Trump calling on them to investigate a political opponent. A few responded. Only 2 expressed concerns. Those were Senators Mitt Romney and Ben Sasse. Do you think Republicans truly don't see anything wrong with this, or are they just afraid to speak out?
No, I think what we're seeing is wait and see mode. I think they want to see where this inquiry goes. They want to see what other facts come out. If they, come out too soon now saying one thing or the other, and facts come out differently, that could be embarrassing. And so I think we'll see more Republicans take sides on either side in the coming weeks. But I think for large part, a lot of political smart minds think, better stay quiet than to say something foolish.
Well, you do see what happens, though, when you speak out. And I might just say, though, in terms of the facts coming out, the president made his comments very public about China. Those are the comments that Romney is criticizing. Those are the types of comments that Ben Sasse is criticizing. Those aren't, anything that's left to be discovered. It's what the president has already said publicly. But, now they've spoken out. Mitt Romney, Brian, has become the target of attacks. That's what happens, right? If you speak out against this president, especially as a member of his own party. The president now calling for Romney's impeachment, even going after him using expletives, which, by the way, is the second time he's used expletives this week, which makes it a little uncomfortable for us to do our jobs reading the president's words on our air.
It does seem like the anger is boiling over. This is a president that's always been impulsive, but the rage is at a much higher volume than it has been in the past. And I think Romney must have known this was coming. This must have been part of his calculation. When he spoke out and I think in a very honest way addressed what is wrong in this situation, he must have known the president was going to send out some tweets in his direction. It is striking what the president's saying today, though. He's been tweeting about Romney all day, tweeting about his enemies and opponents all day. Pretty cushy job the president has just to sit back and tweet during the day in between rounds of golf. But he is misstating the facts about Romney. Even in his tweet just now about impeachment, saying Romney should be impeached, he's using a hashtag Mitt Romney impeach. You can't impeach a sitting senator. Yes, you can expel a sitting senator, you can't impeach. So even on those basic facts, the president doesn't have anybody around him who's providing that information. And I think that gets to the broader point Sarah's making about the lack of a war room. There's nobody really around him helping. There's nobody, for example, booked on the Sunday morning talk shows tomorrow from the White House. So there's no person out there actively defending him except for these GOP lawmakers who have chosen to stand by him.
And to that point, Sarah, CNN's reporting is that one reason for some of the GOP silence is they're getting very little guidance from the White House when it comes to messaging and strategy. How long can the silence last?
I think that is the $100 question. The White House doesn't seem to have a strategy yet. We saw the talking points that they sent to Democratic lawmakers instead. There was something sort of clever about that. A lot of people covered those talking points because of the error of sending them to Democratic lawmakers. But since then, it's been pretty quiet. And the main reason for that is what we've seen over and over again. If the White House picks a strategy, the president contradicts it. He wants to be in charge of this. He wants to own it, and he wants to run the strategy. And so Republican lawmakers and those sitting in the White House right now are going to have to wait to see what that strategy is from the president.
Here's what's interesting, Brian. While Fox News and other, more right-wing media outlets have largely had a supportive message of this president providing cover for him, really, Tucker Carlson of Fox News took an interesting turn last night, writing in an op-ed this: Donald Trump should not have been on the phone with the foreign head of state encouraging another country to investigate his political opponent, Joe Biden. Some Republicans are trying, but there is no way to spin this as a good idea. Like a lot of things Trump does, it was pretty over the top. The leader's official actions should not be about politics. Those two things need to remain separate. Once those in control of our government use it to advance their political goals, we become just another of the world's many corrupt countries. America is better than that. Where did that come from?
Where did that come from? Well, Carlson's very savvy. I think he understands the reality of the state of play, that what the president's done here, potentially incriminating himself, and he's moving the goalposts. He's saying what Trump did is wrong, but it's not impeachable. So he's saying it is wrong, you can't defend it, but it is not worth impeachment. Let's just wait till the election a little more than a year from now. I think he is trying to reframe the narrative in that way, in a way that still helps the president by saying, let's just get to the election rather than go through an impeachment process. But it is a notable crack in the firewall. Think about Fox News and right-wing media as a firewall for the president. And right now it is mostly holding up. Many GOP lawmakers, the ones we're talking about, are taking their cues from what they're hearing on Carlson's show and Sean Hannity's show. Hannity is 100% with the president no matter what. He has guests on there saying this is a coup. Obviously, it's not a coup. This is not an illegal process. It's a legal impeachment process. But because the Hannitys of the world are saying that, it's like a firewall for Trump. And any crack in that firewall is an interesting sign that GOP lawmakers will be watching for.
And Sarah, we've talked about how tough it is maybe for the facts to get out if they aren't being shared through these media outlets that reinforce what Trump supporters and Republican voters may want to hear. Is this the kind of thing, what we're hearing now from Carlson, that would turn the tide?
I think that exactly what Brian said, cracks in the firewall and that water pushing against it of more facts coming out, and it breaks. Interesting, though, looking back to 2017, it was also Tucker who said in July of 2017 not to fire Jeff Sessions, and you saw a lot of Republican senators follow suit from that as well. So Tucker is an important voice on the right. At the same time, you see Eric Erickson taking a very similar stance right now. He wrote an op-ed called "I Support the President." But if you read it, what it says is, I don't see anything impeachable right now. But if I do, then I will not support the president. And he's leaving what amounts to a pretty big gap right there. And I think you will see more and more on the right, especially within that media environment, preparing for a post-Trump conservative movement. And they want to make sure that they are not so tied to whatever could come out next.
I wonder if President Trump has even thought about the post-Trump, because right now it seems like, the Republican Party and President Trump are really one and the same. Right. Sarah Isgur, Brian Stelter, as always, I appreciate the discussion. Thanks. You're great voices to have on this. Thank you. President Trump claims there was no quid pro quo between his administration and Ukraine's leaders, but new damning text messages seem to contradict the president's claims. What they could mean for the impeachment fight next. It may be the most crucial evidence yet in this impeachment inquiry of President Trump. Text messages released by House committees Thursday between U.S. diplomats and a senior Ukrainian aide. And let me read you just a few of the key exchanges. Here's now former U.S. envoy to Ukraine, Kurt Volker, to the top advisor to Ukraine's president. This was in July. Good lunch. Thanks. Heard from White House, assuming President Zelensky convinces Trump he will investigate, get to the bottom of what happened in 2016. We will nail down a date for visit to Washington. Good luck. See you tomorrow, Kurt. And here's a group text from August, including Volker, also U.S. Ambassador to the EU, Gordon Sondland, and the president's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. Hi, Mr. Mayor. Had a good chat with your Mac last night. He was pleased with your phone call. Mentioned Z making a statement. Can we all get on the phone to make sure I advise correctly as to what he should be saying? Want to make sure we get this done right. Thanks. Then in September, we see the acting U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Bill Taylor, telling Sondland, as I said on the phone, I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign. But Sondland responds with this. Bill, I believe you are incorrect about President Trump's intentions. He adds, the president has been crystal clear, no quid pro quos of any kind. Let's bring in CNN legal and national security analyst Carrie Cordero and our crime and justice reporter Shimon Prokupets. Okay, Carrie, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, we now know, missed yesterday's deadline to hand over Ukraine documents to House Democrats after a subpoena. But he said today, quote, we'll obviously do all the things we are required to do by law. And yet earlier this week, he sounded like he was ready to fight. So where do you see things going?
Well, I think that his strategy is to certainly slow roll the production of information. He had also issued a letter last week saying that he didn't want the witnesses, the State Department employees, these ambassadors to be have to testify, and that he portrayed it as if he was protecting them, but really it appeared as if he was trying to prevent them or at least delay their appearance. So I think the strategy is to delay as much as possible and withhold what they can, although obviously this will be a process between Congress and the State Department to be able to receive information.
So what can Democrats do to get this info, to get the testimony they're seeking?
Well, the fact that they have announced that they have an impeachment inquiry and you have multiple committees who are joining together to request the information should be a demand. They can try to litigate it. Although I think last week what was really effective was when the House and the full Senate, bipartisan, all members of both parties voted that the whistleblower complaint, for example, from the intelligence community had to be provided. So I think there's steps that they can take legislatively. That resolution, I think, was very important in forcing the executive branch to provide information, or there's litigation, which takes a lot longer. So it's better if they can resolve it without having to litigate.
Shimon, I want to pick up on something you tweeted about today. Let's put up one of those text message exchanges here, and this is between Ambassadors Taylor and Sondland. You were struck by how long it took for Taylor to reply. Why did that catch your eye?
Because it's this whole conversation, Taylor's, I guess, response to all this, the fact that he's saying, that he's concerned that this has to do with the campaign, I think caught Gordon by surprise. Clearly, they've had this conversation, but it would almost seem that Taylor was setting this up. He starts off by saying, as I said on the phone, and then he says what he says, and then I would assume that Gordon was caught off guard by this and took some 5 hours to respond to this and gave, as you read, this lawyerly-like response to what Mr. Taylor there said, saying that there was no quid pro quo, and then goes on to say that he suggests that they sort of take this conversation offline, stop texting about it, and if he has any concerns, he should speak to some folks connected with this issue. But I think what happens here would seem that perhaps maybe, and this is something that Gordon is going to have to tell the committee when he comes before them on Tuesday, is whether or not he had conversations with anyone following Mr. Taylor's statement there. And I think that's a big question that needs to be answered. The New York Times was reporting that during this gap, this 5-hour gap, that Mr. Sondland was talking to the president, that he called Donald Trump at that time. We've not confirmed that, but certainly that would be interesting for the members of the Hill and the folks looking at this. So I think that time frame is certainly important, because the question is going to be, did you follow up with anyone after Mr. Taylor said this? And did they tell you how to respond to this?
Carrie, the president says no quid pro quo, but I also want to look at this text, because here is the Ukrainian president's advisor telling Volker, once we have a date, we'll call for a press briefing announcing upcoming visit and outlining vision for the reboot of U.S.-Ukraine relationship, including, among other things, Burisma and election meddling and investigations. Ukraine's president denies that President Trump pressured him, but what does that text message tell you about what the Ukrainians were thinking back in August?
Well, the whole of the text message is that one being one part, but all of these messages that were released reveal that these State Department officials were discussing with Ukraine two things. One, setting up a meeting in the Oval Office with the president, and two, the potential aid that was pending, foreign assistance that the United States was providing to Ukraine. Both of those issues come up in multiple of these messages. It's pretty clear that those were being held hostage in some way or part of the negotiation to Ukraine agreeing, the president of Ukraine agreeing to conduct this political investigation that the president wanted. And what's important about that is, first of all, it's shown in the text messages. So it's there. It's also indicated in the content of the July 25th call that's been revealed publicly. And it also shows that this wasn't just the president. I mean, I think that's the part that this State Department aspect of this whole revelation has revealed, which is that there were officials in the State Department who were facilitating the president and Rudy Giuliani and his political desires to get this information from the government of Ukraine. And they were using instruments of U.S. foreign policy and foreign assistance in order to get those political favors.
Shimon Volker testified this week. We have Ambassador Sondland set to testify on Tuesday. The ousted U.S. ambassador to Ukraine will testify later this month. And we haven't even heard from Taylor, the senior U.S. diplomat in Ukraine. They were all named in that whistleblower report. Could any of them become the John Dean of this investigation?
Perhaps any of them could. I think Bill Taylor there, this is a career guy who's been dealing with Ukraine for quite some time. He's been with the State Department for a long time, worked for different presidents. I think he is an important figure in all of this, because you have to go to the state of mind of the folks that were involved in this. Clearly, Mr. Taylor here was raising serious concerns. We don't even know exactly what was said on phone calls, what other kind of things were said to him, what he was feeling. Why was he having these concerns that this was all being done for the political campaign? Those are big questions that need to be answered. And, you know, Mr. Taylor is a key part of this. And we'll see. I mean, there is going to be some fighting to get him to come forward, to come to the members on the Hill to give testimony. We'll see if that ever happens. I'm sure it will, but it's going to take some fighting. But he's becoming a central figure in all this because he was raising all sorts of concerns, it would seem. And then the other thing I want to raise is...
in those text messages.
In those text messages. But he could have been writing memos about all this too, right? We know that people who have interacted with this president, we know people who've been interacting within this administration have been keeping all sorts of memos to protect themselves. And it wouldn't be surprising if someone like Mr. Taylor, who clearly was trying to document something in these text messages, had kept notes. And those things are going to be important in all of this.
For sure. Shimon Prokupets and Carrie Cordero, thank you both.
Thanks, Anna.
The president and some Republicans can't stop ranting about Joe Biden and his son Hunter, but are the president and his children the ones that have a problem when it comes to family business? Do you know that saying, when you point one finger, there are three pointing back at you? Well, as President Trump fires off more unfounded accusations that Joe Biden abused his position as vice president to protect his son, ethics experts say the president is the one with a conflict of interest. CNN's Sarah Murray reports.
What I saw Biden do with his son, he is pillaging these countries and he's hurting us.
President Trump firing off another round of unfounded accusations that Joe Biden used his position as vice president to protect and enrich his son, Hunter Biden.
We are looking for corruption. When you look at what Biden and his son did, and when you look at other people, what they've done, and I believe there was tremendous corruption with Biden.
But ethics experts say Trump is the one with the conflict.
Donald Trump is profiting off his presidency.
Trump's children ink international deals on his behalf and serve in his administration. And unlike Biden, Trump stands to benefit financially from their work.
My two sons, who are right here, Don and Eric, are going to be running the company. They are going to be running it in a very professional manner. They're not going to discuss it with me.
Trump promised no new foreign deals, but that hasn't stopped his family from continuing business overseas. Because Trump never divested from his company, he stands to profit. Trump's most recent financial disclosure shows he holds more than $130 million in foreign assets, according to the Center for Responsive Politics.
The two sons, when they go around the world cutting deals, aren't cutting those deals on their own behalf. They're cutting those deals for their father, Donald Trump.
Trump's recent appearance with the Indian Prime Minister was mutually beneficial.
From CEO to Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States of America, Mr. Donald Trump.
India is looking to reduce trade tensions with the U.S., and Trump was angling for a boost with Indian American voters.
Every day, Indian Americans help write this story of American greatness.
But there's another compelling reason for the two men to stay on good terms.
What's the status now of the construction and also the sales?
Honestly, I think great.
India is one of the most important markets for the Trump organization. The Trumps have plowed ahead with deals in India, Indonesia, Uruguay, and the Philippines that were already in the works before Trump took office. Investigative journalists who spoke with Aaron Burnett for CNN's documentary, The Trump Family Business, say those investments are rife with opportunities to influence the president.
Maybe these are people that want to buy really nice condos, or maybe they're people that want to influence the president.
Foreign governments also leapt at the chance to shell out money at Trump properties. The Trump Organization donated nearly $200,000 to the U.S. Treasury last year. The company says that represents all of its profits from foreign governments, but the numbers are nearly impossible to verify. The Trump family dismisses it as a non-issue.
Someone bought a cheeseburger at the Trump Hotel. It's asinine.
Still, Trump faces multiple lawsuits over whether he's violating the Constitution when his business accepts foreign government funds. Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump's roles in the White House opened up another potential avenue for foreign influence. Last year, China approved more than a dozen trademarks for Ivanka Trump-branded products. The timing, just as the U.S. and China were trying to restart trade talks, raised eyebrows. And according to Washington Post reporting, officials in at least 4 countries talked about ways they could manipulate Kushner, in part by taking advantage of his complicated business entanglements. The president's sons have insisted their dad isn't swayed by business deals. But the elder Trump jumps at every chance to tout his properties on the world stage, even naming his ideal location for the next G7, Trump National, Doral.
It's a great place. It's got tremendous acreage. People are really liking it. Plus it has buildings that have 50 to 70 units in them, so each delegation can have its own building.
We asked the Trump Organization if they wanted to shed any light on how they're preventing potential conflicts between President Trump and his children. They did not respond to a request for comment. Neither did the White House when we asked them if they wanted to address what the president's own kids are up to as he's launching attacks against Hunter Biden. Sarah Murray, CNN, Washington.